Hello and welcome back to this video series on object-oriented programming. In this video, we're going to take a look at the class structure again and look at how we can actually create object instances. And that's the whole purpose of a class, is to create these objects from this blueprint of class. So in the last video, we took a look at a basic class structure where we have the person. This is our noun that we pull from our description. We have some attributes or properties for our person. We have name, age, gender, interest. And then we also have the class can also contain what we call methods. So we have the bio method and we have the greeting method. Again, the class is nothing but a blueprint of a blueprint where we can create multiple instances of a person. So here's the code that we worked on in our last video. It was a renter. And at this point, this renter only has attributes or properties, but no methods at this point. But we could add methods if we want, and those methods will be considered instance methods. So what I want to do here is just quickly go through an example of how we would actually use this renter within our app.java file here. And I'll delete some of this stuff here. So we'll start here. Let me save this. All right, so we have the app.java file, and then we have the renter file. And you'll see that these are in two different files. We have the renter defined. And remember, the first video we talked about object-oriented, it's a way of breaking up our program to focus on the nouns. And so in this case here, we have a renter who will be placed inside of their own class file, of their own file. And then we'll begin to use that file in different places. In this case here, we'll use it in our app.java file. How do we bring this renter into our app.java file? That's the question. Let's say if we wanted to create a new renter in our program. We say hello to the renter first. So we'll say something such as sys out and say hello renter. But let's say we wanted to create a new renter in the application. How would we do that? The first thing is you have to declare the renter object. And so we would say something such as renter. And we just give it, this is the object, or the data type is called object, it's renter. And then we would give it a variable name. And so we just say renter1. So at the very minimum, in terms of declaring an object, we would call it by the class name. And then we would say we would give it a variable name. In this case here, the variable name will be renter1. Now in Java, everything inherits from this class called object. And you'll see that I call this renter object. That's the data type. And so the data type is of object data type. And so if we were to place this renter and say object, that would suffice as well, because renter stems from object. And so object is the data type. But we're going to give it its a specific name, which is going to be renter. And then if we want to create a new instance, we would use this reserved keyword called new. And you've seen this before. You've seen this in a scanner class. You've seen this when we use a random class. But we say new, and what this does is it actually allocates memory on what we call the heap. There's the stack and the heap, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. But we'll say new renter, and then opening and closing parenthesis. And essentially this here is what we call instantiation, where we create a new instance of the renter, of a renter. So we've created one renter instance by saying the data type, we gave it a variable name, and then here again we say new to say that we had to declare memory for a renter object, and which renter, a renter, and this is what we call a constructor that I have highlighted. We'll talk more about constructors in a later video. We could create multiple instances of a renter, because remember, this renter here is a blueprint. It's really like a house where you can create multiple houses and you give each house their own color, their own wallpaper, whatever it may be. But a house has a blueprint, And this renter class is our blueprint. And what we're doing is we're creating multiple instances. For example, if I wanted to, I could create another renter instance and say renter2 equals new renter. And now I have two instances of a renter. Now the question becomes is, how do I begin to populate, or how do I begin to use this renter that I created in this app.java file? That's a good question. So let me show you how to use this renter. We'll first populate renter1, and then we'll populate renter2. All right. So to use the let's use the renter1 first. And so if we wanted to populate renter1, and remember what we're doing here is we're going to basically give this renter a name, an email, move-in date, preferred region. And what I'm going to do here is just copy these over because I'm not going to remember them. Or actually, the IntelliSense will actually help us with this. So we'll say, we're populating renter1, so we're going to call it by its variable name, renter1. And if I put a dot here, there's my IntelliSense. It tells me all of the various properties and methods that are associated that I can use for renter1. Now, you'll see that there's this equals, there's get class, hash code, notify all. Where do you think those come from? You're absolutely right. It comes from the object class. Because remember, every object or user-defined object that we create, it stems from this overall or this parent object or parent class called object. And so in this case, we're going to start to populate. We'll say renter1 name, and we'll give it a name. We'll say Noah. We end everything with with the semicolon. We'll say renter1 city, Minneapolis, or let's just say Chicago. And what I'm going to do is pause this video and populate the rest of this here, so I don't use a lot of time on the video here. But I want you to continue to go through, if you're following along, and to populate the rest of the attributes or properties that we have for our renter class. All right, so what I've done here is I've populated both of my instances here. Now I have to make a quick change here. Instead of saying renter1, I need to say renter2. So because right now, if I left it this way, I'm just reassigning renter1 with new values. So let me make that change here. All right, I've made that change. So I have renter1 and renter2. They both are what we consider now populated object instances, where renter1 has name, city, email, and so forth. And then renter2 has name, city, email, and so forth. Now, if we wanted to go ahead and output this information, we would do a system.output print line. And I'll just do a quick example of that, of just a few different properties for renter1, so you can see how that gets output to the console. So let's take a look at that and do that now. So here, if we sys out, and we say renter's name, do a little string concatenation here. We'll just say renter1.name. And then we'll just do another property here, and we'll just do preferred bed. Let's say preferred bed count. So we'll say renter1 dot preferred bed count. And I'll just give some context here. All right, so what we should output for renter1 is Noah and 2. So if we save this, Control S, and we run this, there we go. So if you look down in our terminal, I'm just going to raise it up. We have Noah, preferred bed count 2. Now, one thing I want to change here before I end this video is something back in our class. Right now, we have bed count and bath count as string. We could change these to different data types. We could say int. I'll do the same thing here for this one here. Int. I'll save it. You'll see that breaks some things in my main program. We have the red squigglies. And so in this case here, we just need to make sure that these are numeric data type. In this case, an integer data type. And to do that, we just get rid of the quotation marks. Oops, it keeps out there. All right, so this wraps up how to create an object instance as well as how to populate an object instance. In our next video, we're going to talk about this idea of what we call data encapsulation. So right now we're able to create these object instances and assign a value, but data encapsulation takes a level of protection in terms of our data for our class. And we'll talk about these things called getter and setter methods. And then I'll also add another method in here just to demonstrate that as well. So we'll continue on with this example. So stay tuned.